Good day, y'all, and welcome to episode 12 of the Aaron Wayne podcast. A couple of quick words before we get started on this one, guys. Talk about new yoga practices that I'm into, what remote teaching's like, which I keep talking about because it's like what I'm living. Also talk about autism spectrum disorder, my thoughts on that, and a new documentary that's on Netflix that I think is interesting and worth watching. Also talk about anti-bias training and what that looks like in public schools and how we can be most effective trying to get the most people to understand why this sort of work is important. So I'll see you on the other side. What's up, guys? Hopefully you guys are doing well. I had a great week this week. First full week of fully remote learning. I had a couple kids in my class because they didn't have either internet access or their parents were teachers. But other than that, man, all of my kids are at home, and it is a very unique experience. In fact, check this. So I'm in the middle of teaching my class, and I had to ask another teacher another thing. So I had to step out of my room and go into another room. And I was so plugged into the matrix. I was so tied in to the class that in my head, I unconsciously felt as if there were students in my room. And I said, all right, hold on, guys, I'll be right back. Just stay seated and I'll be right back. Just like in a normal school day. And then I walk into the other room, and in my head, unconsciously, I'm thinking that there's kids still in my room, where they're not. They're on my computer, right? They were on my computer the whole time. And then I walk into the other teacher's classroom to ask her that question I needed answered. I was like, where are all your kids? And she's like, what do you mean? They're all on the internet. The files are in the computer. I was like, oh, wow. I lost the script on that one. I was like totally in my head about it. Email notification from my student. Dude, the email game right now, my email game is top notch, first and foremost. Better than it's ever been. Better than it ever was. And the amount of emails that I get now is disgusting. I get so many emails. Kids, parents, admin, other teachers. It's just like fill. I think I have 10 unread emails in my email box right now, which is an accomplishment considering I probably get like 100 a day now. That might be an exaggeration. I don't know. Someone check the record. Check the files, man. So I hope you guys are doing well. A couple new things is going on with me this week. I started doing Wednesday morning yoga. Next week I'm starting to do Monday morning yoga as well at my yoga studio, at Imbalance Yoga Studio. Check them out, imbalanceyogastudio.com. We got a lot of cool stuff, a lot of stuff online. This podcast brought to you by imbalanceyogastudio.com. No, I can't say that because they're not sponsoring. I just work for them and with them. But that's where I do my yoga teacher trainings, is through the Imbalance Yoga Studio. But I just started teaching 6 a.m.s on last week, and 2 people showed up. If you're a new yoga teacher, this is a really important thing to know. When you start a new class, or if you're a new teacher, you're going to find yourself in a position where you might be teaching 2 people or 1 person, which is a little awkward, or nobody comes to your class. That is to be expected as you start your yoga career. But I had 2 last week because people were getting used to the schedule. And then this week it was a full class, to the extent that a class can be full in COVID. I think we only let 13 people in. And I didn't have that many, but I had close to that many. And it was awesome teaching 6 a.m. yoga again. There's nothing like doing yoga at 6 in the morning and then going about your day. There's nothing like it. It'll get your life right, get your mind right, get your life right, get your body right. And so now I'm going to start teaching a Monday morning as well, starting next week. So I have 2 6 a.m.s that I teach next week, and then I teach a Wednesday evening class and a Tuesday evening class. And so my yoga schedule, I think that's where I'm going to keep it, because I burnt out. Before this COVID thing, gave me an opportunity to glimpse, once everything closed, it gave me an opportunity to see how much time I was putting into teaching yoga, which I love teaching yoga. But when you're teaching 6 to 9 classes a week, you get really good at teaching. and you get really deep in your own practice, because, well, no, actually, that's not what I mean. You get deep in like teaching, your practice of teaching, but you don't do your own yoga practice because you don't have the time. Like, you can't, especially if here's another secret that they don't tell you as a new yoga teacher. You're not going to make a living doing it. It's like almost impossible. I don't know anybody. I know maybe one guy who makes a living with just yoga. I know a lot of yoga teachers, but nobody makes a living as a yoga teacher unless you own a studio, and then that's like a super chaotic, crazy experience in of itself. So that's a sneak tip for you. But don't let that sway you from becoming a yoga teacher, because it's a super valuable experience being a yoga teacher. I flippin' love teaching yoga, and I'm so glad to be doing it live, and I'm so glad to be doing the Wednesday and Monday morning classes, because the type of people who wake their tushy up at 5 a.m. to get to class by 5:45 or 5:50, 9 right before class starts, which is a lot of people, which is me sometimes too. That is a different type of person. They are dialed in, ready to go, and I love finding opportunities to surround myself with those type of people, because they evoke that spirit that's in me out of me. So that's that. That's gonna be that. Take a breath, Aaron. Calm down, buddy. I'm gonna have a sip of my seltzer water. That was delicious. Very refreshing. I sneakily bought my wife an iPad. She doesn't know. She's been wanting an iPad forever, and it's like not her birthday. Birthday's like 2 months out. But I bought her an iPad. Is that interesting? I don't know. I shared it with you, whether it's interesting or not. Here's something that's interesting. I wrote a couple things down. I started watching this show with Katie, and we crushed it in like a week. And it's called Love on the Spectrum. And now, before you judge this show, let me lay it out for you. Sometimes we watch like stupid, cheesy, like reality TV shows, and you do too. You do too. Don't judge me. But sometimes we do that. And so I thought that this show was going to be that. I thought it was going to be a super cheesy, like Katie wanted to watch. She's like, "Oh, let's see it." And we turned it on. I was like, "I don't want to watch this. I feel like it's going to," and I felt like it was going to be exploiting people with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. And like, as a public school teacher, I work with a lot of students that have ASD, and I have people in my like close loved ones that are working with ASD. And so I was like, I don't want to watch this. It feels exploitative to me. And Katie was like, yeah, you know what? They probably are going to do that. And so we just shelved it. We were like, nah, whatever. And then I heard on another podcast somebody talking about it, and I was like, all right, well, let's give it a go. And so we watched this show, and it brought tears to it's such a touching show. And it's also, I think, super important for the general public to see people with disabilities on TV. And the reason for that is because as a public school teacher, I work with people with disabilities every day on a daily basis. And that's just part of being a teacher, is working with people with disabilities and trying to make life accessible for them and to empower them to do that too. And I've realized over the last 5-6 years I've been teaching that most people, I'm 32 in October, most people can get to 32 and have almost no experiences with people with disabilities, because our society so effectively creates spaces for people with disabilities to live in, and sort of relegates them to like other places, or society is so non-considering what the life of a person with a disability, be it physical, mental, emotional, the structuring of society doesn't consider how to make the world accessible to people with disabilities. And in some ways you can't, right? Like, especially with something like ASD, some individuals, dude, in autism is such a vaguely defined thing. I really want to read 5 books on this. I want to really dive into this, because it's, as I understand it, such an ill-defined disorder. And that's why it's a spectrum disorder. And that's why it has such a breadth of expression. But many people who are working with ASD have like extra sensory sensitivities. So they are very sensitive to specific sounds or loud sounds or abrupt sounds. And so you can't structure a society where construction doesn't take place. You just can't do it. And so like I accept that, and I work with that, and I understand that. But things like, how accessible is a sidewalk? Does the road have a sidewalk? How wide is the sidewalk? And not just for people that you would assume, like people that travel in wheelchairs, but also like people who don't want to be near other people because of a disability that they're working with. So I don't know, this show like has brought up a lot of stuff that I've thought about, but it put explicit individuals and experiences to it. It was beautiful. I think it was a beautiful show, and it brought up for me, one, that society isn't necessarily, society is trying to solve this problem. I hope, and we're not doing a great job. And then on top of that, there's so many people with disabilities that are lonely, and it's so tragic. It's so sad. And there are a lot of people that don't have any diagnosed disabilities, and they are lonely too. So like I have empathy for all lonely individuals, but this show like is about dating, and it's about dating with people that have ASD. And it's just a beautiful show. And another thing they do in this show is they, like, for example, I know somebody that has ASD, and this person likes to pick up rocks, and this person just loves to pick up rocks, and like, I can't make sense of it because it's not my experience. Just picking up and the sensation of pulling rocks, like gravel out of gravel and off the ground, and feeling that in the hands and then letting it go, is such an enjoyable sensory experience for this individual. And I can't make sense of it because it's not my lived experience. And this person also is really afraid of like things that are in places that they don't belong. For example, a fish tank. Like if you go into a living room and there's a fish tank, it's like, oh my God, why are there fish in this living room? And so for someone who isn't acquainted with these ideas of the intense likes and dislikes of somebody, again, it's a spectrum disorder. So some people with ASD have no like huge preferences, like sharp preferences like this, but then some do. For someone who doesn't understand what that experience is like, you're like, well, just like stop picking up the rocks, or like, well, it's just a fish tank. Just don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. And this show does a really good job of articulating how intense those sensations are for people. And they do it by, like you see, like think of those old school dating shows, right? Like Aaron likes long walks on the beach and sunsets with on a picnic, sunsets and hikes in the mountains. You know what I mean? Like it has like those sort of things. Like Aaron doesn't like smokers and people who use bad language, like those sorts of things. It does that, but they ask these people with ASD, like, what are your likes and dislikes? And they say things like, I really hate the sound of jackhammers, or I really like, I don't know, curtains. You know what I mean? I just said that because there's curtains in my room. And what they do is they really clearly, using cinematography, show how that could be extremely aggravating for somebody. So you and I, because of the way, I mean, I don't know you, but for me, I'll speak from my experience. the way that I live my life is I drive past construction, I hear a jackhammer, and it doesn't even register. I just keep on cruising. I don't even notice it because my brain has learned to assimilate those sounds into the world and just let them go because they're not necessary for me to engage with. But someone with ASD, like, they could hear that jackhammer and it's all they can think about. And so this show does a really good job of showing people what love looks like in the autism community, what what people are doing, like people that are doing really good work, trying to enable people to live their fullest life in spite of a disability. I just think it's beautiful. I just love it. I just wanted to talk about it. I talked about it for like 12 minutes, and I hope you like it. I hope you watch it. I hope you watch it, and I hope that you watch it and you enjoy it for the right reasons. Because some people may watch it and then enjoy it for the wrong reasons. And here's the thing. You can watch TLC and you can watch Hoarders, which is like a spectacle of mental illness. Or you could watch My 600-Pound Life, and like, again, another spectacle of mental illness and eating disorders. You can watch all these shows, and it seems like they're using these people as commodities in order to, like, it's like this voyeuristic exploitation film is what it is like. And this show, Love on the Spectrum, didn't do that. You could tell, like, there's time, it makes me want to cry. There are times in the show where some of the people get overwhelmed, and you can hear the producer like, hey, do you want to take a break? And I just think it's so beautiful. It makes me feel emotional. Because that's what it is. It's grace. It's grace. Continually offering grace to people and understanding that they're working with the best things they have. Yeah. What is this podcast about? Not this episode, but like this is number 12, right? I got my legs under me. I'm cruising. I'm finding time. I'm working it in. I'm posting them. I feel good about it. What is this podcast? I don't know. I have no idea. But I'm excited to be doing it. I'm here. Sometimes it's silly. Sometimes I talk about sad things. Sometimes I talk about hopeful things. We did my anti-bias training at school, which I thought was great and sort of ties into this conversation on people with disabilities. It was a 3-hour training, which is a monster of a training. Let me tell you here and now. 3 hours. Actually, it's when I looked at it on the schedule, I was like, googly moogly, 3 hours of a training, a 3-hour tour. And then we just cruised through it. It didn't feel like 3 hours to me, but it was a anti-bias training, sort of bringing to the fore the conversations around, specifically, I think the big thrust of the conversation was about race, specifically blackness and whiteness within the structures of race. And then there was also some dialogue about ableism, I guess you would say, about people's abilities and sort of designing curriculum. So I'm a public school teacher, so all of this was structured within the context of public education. And I think it's great. I love that we're bringing this conversation up for people. And as we were going through the training, I was thinking, as I was listening to the presenter, I was thinking, what is the experience of people who came into this conversation thinking there's no problems of equity and race in the world? Or even worse, people who feel that the whole conversation around race and equity is upside down, and that we need to focus less on equity and more on competence. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, how is this landing for people who feel as if the existence of this training is an attack on their them. So, if we want to make a more equitable world, we have to find a way to make that conversation accessible to people who think the world is already equitable. Does that make sense? That does make sense. It's like this, the Kunga methodology of yoga that I teach my yoga teacher training that I teach through the Kunga Yoga School, one of the major precepts of that is we want to make yoga accessible for all populations. People with who've never done yoga, people who do yoga all the time, people that are able-bodied, people that have disabilities, people that suffer from post-traumatic stress, all of these things. Like the aim is to make it people with different levels of range of motion and accessibility, and so the languaging around it, the structures of the class, everything is make this stuff accessible. And so, sometimes making it accessible looks like a really basic class. And the way that I interpret the doctrine of accessibility is that sometimes you sort of remove the hippy-dippy factor of it and you make it a bit more about the physical practice so that the students can become more in tune with the practice through the physical asana. And then when they're ready for it, then we start to talk about, Ishvara Pranidhana and Brahmacharya and all these heavier concepts in the yogic world. And I think, so get in the door that is open instead of trying to break someone's door, metaphorically speaking. And when I think about these conversations on equity, I don't know what the most useful way to connect with people who think that the conversation isn't worth having. Because there's a whole bunch of people, especially now. So the question that I keep asking, because we've had a couple of these things and I've yet to get a satisfactory answer, is as a culture, we've the most up-to-date understanding of the words white supremacy and racist. And my learning from this is coming from the podcast Seen On, called Seeing White, where they do some work with Ibram Kendi, and I think Ta-Nehisi Coates is involved with that. I don't know. All of those projects start to blend together for me because they're such structured around similar ideas. But also, so Seen On is a great podcast. I think it's season 2, called Seeing White. There's another podcast called 1619, which is put together by the New York Times. When we talk about 14th, or maybe it's 16th, I don't know, sometimes I get my numbers mixed up. It's the amendment that abolished slavery, but then created this loophole where if people are jailed, then they can work without pay. And that's a Netflix documentary. And so all of these ideas, all this learning that I've been pulling in, learning about, what's that book called? It's not White Rage, White Fragility, reading White Fragility, and sort of educating myself. Now I'm in a space where I understand that the most up-to-date definitions of the terms white supremacist and racist have changed from how I understood them 5 or 10 years ago. And I have a different understanding of how people are using that word because I've been doing the work and reading these things and having conversations. And so for example, white supremacy, what do you think white supremacy means? Just take a second, think about it. What does white supremacy mean? If you'd asked me 5 years ago, Aaron, what do you think white supremacy means? I would have said any sort of white supremacist is a person who pushes forward whiteness as superior to anything that's not whiteness. And so that shows up in what we saw in Charlottesville in 2016, or what we see with neo-Nazis and KKK groups and hate organizations. Like, that's what white supremacy looked like to me. And now I have a different understanding that's been provided to me from the literature and from the podcasts and the discussions and the documentaries, which is white supremacy is sort of this unconscious systemic preference that has disproportionately advantaged white folk. And then the word racist is used synonymously in that context. And if this is a conversation you want to have, please let me know. I would love to learn if this is a space where I'm sort of like throwing words together and blending them. But as I understand it, the word white supremacy and racist are working synonymously within structures. And so you say racist, it's like racist is someone who uses racial epithets or is actively or passively even pushing down people of a race that is not the one that they show up as. But now what we're doing is we're not fully defining those terms in the modern understanding of them. And so you have, where I live in Appalachia, which is predominantly white, and you have people who are like, I'm not a white supremacist. I'm not racist. So why am I having to go to a training and learning about this? And I think that the real task here is to enable people to see, yes, that's not the point. The point isn't that you're an overt, aggressive, racist, or white supremacist. The point is to understand that black women are 3 times as likely to die in childbirth as white women, and that educational outcomes are disproportionately different between white and black folk. And, it's education, wealth, multi-generational family wealth, health outcomes, all of this is drastically different. And it's drastically different in a particular direction. So you could take any random group. It could be Yankees fans and Red Sox fans. And you could say this group and this group, randomly assigned, people who prefer Arby's over McDonald's, like 2 groups, whatever, doesn't matter. And of course, they will have differences in mean income, in health outcomes. And that's just the way statistics work. But when it's a pattern across categories that are consistent between white and black, that's where you start to see an understanding of how it's actually a difference structurally through our society versus like, we grabbed people who prefer tater tots and we grabbed people who prefer French fries. And if we take those 2 groups together, the one group will probably have better educational outcomes than the other, because that's just the way statistics and grouping work. But when it's like over and over again, it's like health outcomes, educational outcomes, wealth distribution, multi-generational wealth distribution, representation in corporations, representation in politics, all of these things. It demonstrates a pattern. And so I got a lot more to learn. In fact, what I really like to do is I like to pull this stuff in, like the white fragility work and the 1619 and Seen On, Seeing Whiteness, and the Netflix documentaries on the prison industrial complex, and the new Jim Crow, which is a great book, which is all about the prison industrial complex. All these things. I like to pull all of this in. I got 90 seconds and then I'm going to end this podcast because I'm going to keep it right at 30 today. Pull all that stuff in. And then I like to go listen to Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, and a really important thinker in my life who seems to be running counter to the tide of equity, like this equity acknowledgement and the equity work, is Sam Harris. I'm a huge fan of Sam Harris, and he differs than with the public discourse, which I think is really interesting. I think my video is going to end in 40 seconds. And so I will keep this here at 30. I didn't find any summation. I didn't wrap this up for you. And that's okay, because it's an ongoing dialogue. I don't know. I'm hungry. I'm fasted still. It's 4 o'clock. I haven't eaten yet. So I'm going to go eat. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Bye. Sometimes you just got to throw a quick one in there. You know what I mean? I was like, all right, I'm going out to have a glass of wine with my wife, and before she gets home, I'm going to just crush a quick pod for the people. So hope you guys are doing well. Follow along with my story and what I'm up to at AaronWayneYoga.com. So shoot me an email at hello@AaronWayneYoga.com. My Instagram, my Twitter, my Facebook are all at Aaron Wayne Yoga. And 12 podcasts, man. We're doing it. We out here, y'all. Hope you're doing well, and I'll catch you on the next one.